My name is Ayla, 36 years old. Christmas at my in-laws' house always feels like walking into a carefully staged photograph. Too much color, too many lights, and everyone arranged just so, like if anybody moved the wrong way, the whole glossy image would crack. The smells are warm and familiar, the tree is perfect, the table is set like a magazine spread, but underneath all of it, there's this tightness, this buzzing sense that one wrong word could blow everything up. Ella stood pressed against my side, her small hand slightly damp in mine, the other holding her spelling bee certificate like it was made of glass. She was 8, cheeks flushed with excitement, lips moving silently as she rehearsed what she wanted to say. She'd been talking about this moment all week, how she wanted to show Grandma first, how Grandma would be proud, how it would be their special secret before anyone else saw it. I had smiled and nodded and swallowed the knot in my throat because I knew my mother-in-law better than my daughter did. We'd barely taken our coats off when Ella tugged at me. "Now?" she whispered. I glanced around the living room. Diane was in her usual chair near the tree, posture straight, sweater perfect, lips already fixed in that thin, polite smile she wore like armor. Melissa lounged at the far end of the couch, Bella perched beside her like a little princess on display. Raymond sat in the recliner pretending to be invisible, eyes on his hands, instead of on the people using the room like a stage. Eric stood near the doorway beside me, shoulders tight, jaw clenched, in a way only I would notice. "Okay," I murmured to Ella. "Go ahead, sweetheart." Ella took a breath and stepped forward. She held the certificate with both hands, gripping it so tightly the paper curved. "Grandma," she said, voice small but bright, "I wanted to show you this first." Diane took the paper between two fingers as if she were picking up something that might stain her. She stared at it for one long inhale, one long exhale, and I watched the change in her face. The polite smile vanished. Her lips thinned into that razor-sharp line I'd seen so many times before. The one that meant she'd decided to ruin something just because she could. "You think you can buy my love with that?" she said. It was so quiet afterward I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Ella blinked. I blinked. I swear the room blinked. For a split second, I saw confusion cross Diane's face, like even she couldn't believe what had just come out of her mouth. But then she committed. She tore the certificate in half. The sound was louder than it should have been, a jagged rip that cut through the soft Christmas music playing in the background. Then she tore it again, and again. Slow, deliberate movements, shredding my daughter's pride like she was folding a paper crane, except there was nothing delicate or beautiful about it. She dropped the pieces into the trash can beside her chair without a second glance, like discarding junk mail. Ella stared at the trash. Her face went very still for a moment, the way kids' faces do when their brain is trying to decide if what just happened is real. Then her mouth trembled. Her eyes filled with tears she tried to blink away, because she is the kind of child who doesn't like to cry in front of people. Her fingers curled around the empty air where her certificate used to be. The room did not erupt. It did something worse. It stayed quiet. Melissa smoothed her dress and gave the slightest satisfied smile, the kind you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. Bella watched with an almost curious brightness, like she was witnessing a rule being reinforced. Who was allowed to shine and who wasn't. Raymond kept his gaze locked on his lap, shoulders sinking farther into the chair like he wanted to merge with the cushions. Eric stood absolutely still beside me, expression frozen, eyes wide, lips parted, but no words coming out. No one moved toward Ella. No one said, "That's not okay." No one said anything. I could feel my pulse in my teeth. Then Hannah moved. Her chair scraped back across the hardwood floor, piercing the silence. My 11-year-old stood up slow, like she was giving the room a chance to stop her. No one did. Her shoulders were drawn tight, her jaw set, her eyes burning in a way I'd never seen before. She walked past Diane, past Melissa, straight to Ella, planting herself between her sister and the trash can like a shield. "Why would you do that?" she demanded, voice shaking but loud enough to echo slightly. "She's 8. Good grandmas don't do that." The air changed. It was like the room had been holding its breath for years and finally exhaled something ugly and sour. I saw Diane's eyes widen, not with remorse but with offense, like the true crime here was being confronted by a child. "How dare you speak to me like that?" she snapped. Hannah didn't move. "How dare you?" she shot back. "You hurt my sister." Someone gasped near the doorway. Someone else stared harder at the tree, pretending the lights were fascinating. Eric still didn't move. He looked like he'd been turned to stone. I turned my gaze to him, waiting, begging silently for him to step in, to say something, to be the father I knew he could be. His throat worked, his hands clenched, but nothing came out. And that, somehow, was the moment something inside me finally broke. Diane muttered under her breath, "Kids today are too full of themselves, loud enough for everyone to hear." No apology, no regret, only that familiar superior squint, the one that said she was absolutely certain she was in the right. "We're leaving," I said. The words surprised even me. They came out flat, steady, almost quiet, but they landed like a hammer. Hannah immediately reached for Ella's hand. Ella grabbed on like it was the only solid thing left in the room. Nobody tried to stop us. Not Diane, who crossed her arms and looked offended. Not Melissa, who watched like she'd been waiting for this scene her whole life. Not Raymond, who seemed to disappear deeper into his chair. Not even Eric, who stared after us with haunted eyes and didn't move. We put on our coats in silence. I helped Ella into hers, smoothing her hair, watching her avoid every adult gaze in the room. Hannah's chin was set stubbornly, her anger the only thing holding back tears. I could feel eyes on us, but no one offered comfort. No one said, "Wait, let's talk about this." They just sat there. I opened the front door. The winter air hit my face sharp and cold, honest in a way the warmth behind us had never been. The glow from the house spilled onto the snow-dusted porch, bright and inviting if you didn't know better. From the outside, it looked like the perfect Christmas. Lights, laughter, family gathered together. From the inside, it felt like standing in a snow globe full of broken glass. I closed the door slowly, deliberately, like sealing off a crime scene. As the latch clicked, something settled at the base of my spine. A realization I had been dancing around for years finally landed. This wasn't random. This wasn't Diane having a bad day. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a pattern finally showing its teeth. We walked down the steps, our breath frosting in the air, Hannah still holding tight to Ella's hand. I glanced back once at the glowing windows and knew, with a clarity that made my chest ache, that Christmas wasn't the beginning of the problem. It was the moment everything finally snapped open. And some part of me already understood that what happened tonight was just the first crack, the real explosion, the one that would rip through years of secrets, money, and loyalty, was still coming. If someone had told me 5 years ago that Diane would one day tear up my child's certificate, I would have laughed politely and said something naive like, "She's intense, but she'd never do that." It turns out intensity was the appetizer. The main course was spite, served cold and slow over years, long before Christmas ever imploded. The truth is, Diane had been building her glittering little hierarchy long before I entered the family. But back then, I mistook her sharpness for personality, not pathology. When I first met Eric, I knew two things instantly. He was gentle in a way that made you want to protect him, and he carried guilt like a second spine. He apologized for things that didn't require apologies. Bumping a table, taking the last cookie, breathing too close to his mother. That should have been a sign. Instead, I chalked it up to politeness. The first real red flag came early in our relationship. I had mentioned finishing at the top of my college class. A simple fact, not bragging. Diane glanced up with a look so flat it could have been used to measure countertops. "Oh," she said, "one of those high-achieving types." She didn't smile, didn't elaborate, just let the judgment settle like dust. I brushed it off, thinking, fine, she doesn't value academics. People are allowed their quirks. But looking back, that was the first crack, a quiet warning that success, at least the kind not attached to her chosen favorites, was unwelcome. Then Bella was born, and suddenly Diane transformed into a Christmas float of praise. Everything Bella did, every wobble scribble, every barely legible worksheet to every participation ribbon, became a miracle requiring celebration. "She's brilliant," Diane would say proudly. "She's gifted, exceptional." Bella isn't a bad kid. Not then, not now. She's sweet, dreamy, easily distracted, and utterly adored by Diane, a pedestal built before she could even read. Then Ella came into the world. Ella, who memorized bedtime stories before she could fully pronounce her R's. Ella, who once corrected Eric's math bill at age 5. Ella, who won her first small reading award in kindergarten and beamed like she'd been handed the moon. And every time Ella succeeded, Diane's smile tightened a fraction more. Compliments grew shorter, nods grew stiffer, conversations changed faster. I wanted to believe I was imagining it, that Diane just didn't know how to praise kids equally, that she was tired, distracted, stressed. But even then, the truth was whispering in the corners. It was Hannah who said it first. We were driving home from another forced cheerfulness Sunday dinner when Hannah, 8 years old at the time, said quietly from the back seat, "Grandma only likes stuff we show her when it's not too good." I nearly hit the brakes. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "She gets mad when Ella does good things," Hannah explained. "But if it's something small, she smiles like normal. She doesn't want Ella to be better than Bella." 8 years old, and she had already mapped the family power structure. I stared into the rearview mirror at her serious face. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that adults didn't do things like that, but children have a way of seeing what adults try to excuse. I didn't correct her because I knew she wasn't wrong. The denial cracks widened a few months before Christmas, the moment everything finally clicked into place. Ella had just won a modest class award. Nothing huge, just something she worked hard for. She brought the certificate to show Diane, glowing with pride. Diane glanced at it, forced a smile that never reached her eyes, and pulled me aside later with the precision of someone cutting a jewel from stone. "You should tell her not to flaunt those things," she said coolly. "It can hurt other kids' feelings." I blinked, confused. "What other kids?" Diane's gaze flicked directly toward the living room, where Bella was sitting cross-legged on the carpet. "Children who don't have it as easy," she said sharply. Then, as if catching herself, she added, "Ella needs humility." Humility, always a weapon in the wrong hands. That was the moment I felt the click in my brain, the sound of years of small, strange moments finally aligning. The way Diane would change the subject when Ella mentioned school, her icy politeness when Ella brought home anything remotely impressive, her over-the-top praise for Bella at the smallest accomplishment, her warnings that Ella shouldn't show off. It wasn't about protecting Bella's feelings, it was about protecting Diane's narrative. Bella on top, always. Ella beneath her, always. And Diane wasn't the only one invested in the hierarchy. Eric, for years, had been paying Diane and Melissa financially, quietly, consistently, always with the same guilty shrug. It began with a loan here and there, then grew into regular transfers Diane treated like a salary she earned for simply existing. Every time I questioned it, Eric folded inward. "She raised us," he'd say softly. "She struggled. She needs help." But I started noticing patterns. Diane's guilt trips weren't subtle. They were crafted, calculated. She talked about compassion as if it were owed only to her, never from her. And the more I watched, the more I realized she treated Eric's financial support like a leash, tugging it whenever she wanted control. It made sense then why Ella's achievements bothered her. Diane didn't want a confident child in the family. She wanted dependence, gratitude, obedience, a hierarchy where she sat firmly at the top and everyone else bent to stay in her good graces. Ella's natural brilliance threatened that. Hannah's quiet perception threatened it. Even my own self-assuredness threatened it. Christmas didn't create the explosion. Christmas was simply where all the hidden wires Diane had laid finally crossed and lit each other. So when we walked out that night, snow crunching under our boots, leaving behind a room full of adults who chose silence over protection, I realized something chilling but oddly clarifying. Ella wasn't the first to be cut down for shining too bright. She was simply the first person brave enough and young enough to ask why. And the moment she asked, the entire family system trembled. Because what Diane did on Christmas wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern finally unmasked. And I knew deep down the fallout from that moment wouldn't stay contained inside one holiday night. The cracks we'd seen were only the beginning. The real collapse was coming. By the time we got home from Diane's Christmas disaster, the girls moved as if gravity had doubled around them. Ella walked straight to the couch without a word, her shoulders curled inward, her hands still gripping the shredded pieces of her certificate like they were pieces of herself. Hannah sat next to her immediately, not touching her at first, just keeping watch the way a soldier guards a wounded friend. Their silence filled the room louder than any sob could have. "I'll put on a movie," I heard myself say, my voice steady though my hands were shaking. "Something cozy." Ella nodded without looking up. Hannah gave me a short, sharp glance, the kind that said she understood exactly how wrong the night had been. She was angry, but beneath her anger was grief. Grief I wasn't ready to face yet. I turned on some animated film the kids had seen 100 times. None of us cared what it was. I just needed something soft in the background, something normal, something that didn't sound like my mother-in-law tearing a child's joy in half. In the kitchen, I reached for the cocoa mix with trembling fingers. My body felt stolen, like someone had slipped into it and I was just watching from far away. The pot clanged against the stove louder than it should have. When the heat clicked on beneath it, I felt it. Eric standing in the doorway behind me. "Ayla," he began quietly, and something inside me snapped. "She tore up her certificate," I said, whipping around so fast the spoon nearly slipped from my hand. "In front of everyone. She humiliated her." My voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp and trembling with the anger I'd been swallowing for years. "I know," Eric whispered. "I know, You just what?" I cut in. "You watched it happen. Ella looked at you. I looked at you, and you did nothing." He flinched, shoulders curling inward like he was bracing for a blow. I froze. That word froze held a weight I didn't understand yet. He sank into a chair, elbows propped on his knees, rubbing his face with both hands. When he finally lifted his head, something cracked open in his eyes. Something old, something painful, something he had buried so deep it had fossilized. "She used to do the same to me," he said. I went still. The cocoa began bubbling too quickly behind me, but I didn't move to turn it off. "What do you mean?" I asked, though I already knew. I just needed him to say it. Needed him to hear himself say it. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "You know how she tells everyone I was so smart as a kid? Funny how she leaves out how much she hated it." He swallowed hard, words spilling out of him like a dam finally giving way. Any time I used a new word, she'd tell me to stop trying to sound smarter than everyone. If I got a good grade, she'd say I was bragging. If I brought home an award, she'd roll her eyes and tell me to put it away before company came so I didn't embarrass my sister. My heart clenched. This wasn't confession. This was a man excavating his own childhood under duress. "I thought," he said, voice cracking, "I thought she was keeping me grounded. She made me believe that being proud of myself was wrong, that I was wrong. And when she tore up Ella's certificate, it was like watching her do it to me all over again." His breath shuddered. Only this time I couldn't take it, because it wasn't me, it was my kid. He stood abruptly, pushing the chair back with trembling force. "I'm done," he said, the words clipped and final. "I won't let her do this again, not to them." Before I could ask what done meant, he stormed down the hall toward our home office. I turned off the stove and followed, my heartbeat climbing into my throat. By the time I reached the doorway, Eric already had his laptop open. Rows of transactions filled the screen. His jaw tightened with each scroll. Monthly transfers to Diane labeled things like utilities, repairs, groceries. Transfers to Melissa, too. All the little emergencies we'd quietly covered. All the guilt he'd been groomed to carry. "I've been paying her to treat our kids like they're beneath her," he whispered. He clicked one recurring payment. Cancel. Confirm. Another. Cancel. Confirm. Each click sounded like cutting a wire running straight to Diane's power source. "Eric," I said softly, stepping closer, "are you sure you want to do this right now?" He didn't look up. I should have done it a long time ago. And then the phone buzzed on the desk. "Diane." Her name lit up the screen like a grenade. Eric stared at it for a second, then placed it on speaker and answered. "What did you do?" Diane shrieked. There was no greeting, no pretense, just fury. "My card got declined at the store. Declined. Are you trying to embarrass me?" "I stopped paying your bills," Eric said calmly, too calmly. A man past his breaking point calm. A sharp inhale. "What do you mean you stopped? You can't just stop. After everything I've done for you, after raising you, after sacrificing—" "You tore up Ella's certificate," Eric said, voice trembling but steady. "You humiliated her." "She struts around like she's better than Bella," Diane snapped. "Someone has to keep her in check." My stomach twisted. There it was. The quiet truth turned loud and undeniable. "You don't get to hurt my daughter," Eric said, a cold steel entering his voice I had never heard before. "Not to protect someone else's feelings. You're letting Ayla twist you against your own mother." Eric hung up. He didn't yell, didn't throw anything. He just ended the call like he was putting down a weapon he never wanted to use but finally had to. The phone buzzed again almost immediately. "Melissa," Eric muttered, exhausted. He answered. "What did you do to Mom?" Melissa snapped. "She's crying. You cut her off because Ella couldn't handle being told no?" "Mom tore up her certificate," Eric said. "She humiliated her." "Oh, please," Melissa said. "Your kid embarrasses Bella all the time with that trophy stuff. She needed to learn she's not the star of the family." I froze. The words echoed in my skull like a physical blow. Melissa wasn't slipping. She wasn't mistaken. She was revealing the rule book. "And you think Ella should shrink?" Eric asked quietly. "So Bella doesn't feel insecure?" Melissa scoffed. "Well, yeah." Eric hung up again. This time, he stayed staring at the phone long after the call ended. His hand shook. His face crumpled. But he didn't break. Down the hall, Hannah stood in the doorway, arms wrapped around herself. She'd heard. Her eyes were too old in that moment. "Are we ever going back there?" she asked. Eric looked at her, really looked, like a man staring at truth for the first time without flinching. "No," he said, "not after this." Hannah nodded once, a verdict accepted. Ella appeared behind her, puffy-eyed, still holding the taped-together scraps of her certificate. "Why doesn't Grandma like when I do good things?" she whispered. That sentence will haunt me forever. I knelt in front of her, brushing her hair from her damp cheeks. "Baby," I said, "some people feel small inside, and instead of fixing that, they hurt people who shine. That's not your fault. You did nothing wrong. You hear me?" Ella nodded slowly. Eric knelt beside us. Tears slipped from his eyes, but his voice was sure when he spoke. "No one is ever going to tear up your achievements again," he said. "Not while I'm here, I promise." And for the first time all night, the promise felt like something solid, something that could actually hold. But I didn't yet know that the ripple from Diane's cruelty and our reaction to it was about to ignite a wildfire through the entire family. One that Diane would never be able to put out. If I thought Christmas night was the end of the storm, I was adorably naive. Diane was never the type to lick her wounds quietly. She was the type to set the whole neighborhood on fire just to distract from the fact that she tripped on her own sidewalk. And I should have known the silence after Eric cut off the payments wasn't peace at all, just Diane inhaling before the next explosion. 2 days later, I woke up to 9 unread messages from relatives I barely knew. Great aunts, cousins from other states, people who hadn't texted me in years. The messages all said the same thing. "Have you seen what Diane posted? You okay? Oh my God, is this about Ella?" Nothing good ever starts with, "Have you seen what she posted?" I opened Facebook. There she was. Diane had published a full manifesto, long, dramatic, dripping with martyrdom. She'd posted a picture of herself beside her Christmas tree, looking like the mourning saint of misunderstood grandmothers, and wrote a paragraph so twisted it could have qualified as fiction. According to Diane, I was raising arrogant children who believe trophies make them superior. Ella had shoved her certificate in everyone's faces. She, Diane, had gently corrected her, and I had launched an explosive, manipulative overreaction to humiliate her in her own home. She conveniently left out the part where the gentle correction involved ripping an 8-year-old's accomplishment into confetti and dumping it in the trash. I snorted so loud the cat jumped off the bed. Then Melissa dove into the comment section like Diane's personal hype woman, posting things like, "Ella always acts superior. Some kids need to be humbled. Mom was just teaching her manners." I almost dropped my phone. Some kids need to be humbled. My daughter, 8 years old, was apparently now a threat to family hierarchy. The more I scrolled, the worse it got. Melissa even suggested Bella was being bullied by Ella's success, bullied by a child who barely speaks loud enough to order her own ice cream. I sat there, dizzy with rage and disbelief and something worse, recognition. This was the pattern. Minimize the cruelty, magnify the reaction, rewrite the narrative until Diane looked wounded and everyone else looked unreasonable. Eric shuffled into the room, hair wild, eyes sleepy. "You saw it?" "I saw it," I said. "I also saw Melissa auditioning for the role of worst person alive." He took the phone, read silently, and I watched his expression change. He didn't look shocked. He looked tired, bone-deep tired, like a man who had finally accepted he'd been raised in a funhouse full of warped mirrors and was just now seeing his reflection accurately for the first time. "We're responding," he said. My stomach flipped. "Are you sure? Diane's already embarrassing herself. Do we really want to jump in?" "We're not jumping in," Eric said. "We're telling the truth. No more hiding. No more letting her control the story." I nodded because something inside me understood this wasn't about winning. It was about stopping a cycle that had suffocated him his whole life. We wrote a post together. 2 days ago, our daughter Ella proudly showed her grandmother her spelling bee certificate. Her grandmother tore it into pieces and threw it away. This wasn't the first time she dismissed our children's achievements. We're choosing to step back for their well-being. We added a photo of Ella's certificate taped back together, and screenshots of Diane's texts. Knock her down a peg. She needs to stay humble. Don't let her steal attention from Bella. We didn't add insults, didn't add rage. We let the truth sit there, uncovered. It was enough. Within minutes, comments flooded in. Not defensive, not confused. Horrified. She tore it up? Who tears up a child's certificate? I thought Ella was bragging. I'm so sorry. This is emotional abuse. Then came the one that changed everything. A cousin of Eric's, someone who never took sides, wrote, "She did the same to me when I won an award in high school. I never forgot it." A single sentence, and the dominoes began falling. Suddenly, relatives who had supported Diane deleted their comments. Others apologized. Some admitted they'd seen signs for years. Melissa fell completely silent. Diane didn't post again. Raymond reportedly told someone he was too old for this circus. And then the phone rang. It wasn't Diane or Melissa. It was Richard, Eric's uncle, the quiet one, the man who only spoke when something actually mattered. Eric answered on speaker. "I saw the posts," Richard said, his voice calm, controlled, the voice of a man who had never once exaggerated a feeling in his life. Eric swallowed. "Yeah, it's been a lot." "I spoke to several people," Richard said. "This has gone on long enough." Eric blinked. "What did you mean?" "Your mother has been taking money from all of us," he said bluntly. "For years." I froze. "All of us? Excuse me?" Richard continued, completely unfazed by the fact he was dropping a small nuclear bomb. "I've decided something. She's not getting another dollar. Not from me. Not from anyone she's been leaning on." Eric's mouth fell open. Before either of us could speak, Richard added, "I moved the money I used to send her every month into 2 education funds, one for Ella, one for Hannah. I sat down because my legs stopped understanding their job. They'll each have a full start for college, trade school, whatever they choose," he said. "It's done." Eric's voice cracked. "Richard, that's huge." "That's accountability," Richard replied. "I'd rather invest in children who work hard than a woman who tears their achievements apart." And just like that, he hung up. Eric stared at the phone like it had turned into a live grenade. Then he exhaled. Long, shaky, years in the making. Of course Diane found out. Of course she did. She started calling every relative, screaming that I had stolen her future, that Eric abandoned her, that Richard was brainwashed. But this time, no one defended her. Not one person. Melissa deactivated her Facebook account. Bella stayed off social media entirely. Raymond told someone he just wanted a quiet life. And Diane fell silent again, but not peaceful silent. Storm-plotting silent. But for once I didn't care. Because that night, Ella taped a brand new certificate on her wall. Hannah hugged her and said, "See, this is how people who love you act." Eric stood behind them, eyes bright, voice steady. I watched the 3 of them, and something settled inside me. Not revenge, not triumph. A boundary, a line drawn, a cycle broken. Diane tried to make my daughter smaller. All she did was show us how strong we could stand.